Hi, I'm Lexi McPherson. I'm teaching you today about chronic and severe misbehavior interventions. So some examples of chronic and severe misbehaviors could include hostile and aggressive behavior, which could be verbal, physical aggression, or vandalism, and it's always with the intent to harm, to inflict revenge, or to retaliate. Similar to hostile aggressive behavior is defiance and verbal aggression, where a student attempts to manipulate and gain social control through their words. Oftentimes, students like this will have a "you can't make me" attitude, and they it's specific to verbal communication. So a lot of times these students are not typically physical, but instead are pretty calculated with their words and use their words to gain that social control and to manipulate. The next one is oppositional defiant disorder. This can be classified as students that have a negative, defiant, disobedient, or hostile to behavior, and is typically towards an authority figure. Again, with that, a lot of times with that "you can't make me" attitude. And another thing to note here is that that behavior has to be really reoccurring to classify as oppositional defiant over just regular negative, disobedient behavior. And another form of chronic misbehavior that can turn severe is ADHD. Students with ADHD are typically pretty temperamental, overreactive, and they have a lack of impulse control and focus. And again, that has to be recurring to classify as ADHD. And just to tell you why we should be talking about this, 2 to 3 children with there's typically in a classroom of 30 kids, there's 2 to 3 children with ADHD. So this isn't just like a random, like maybe one every couple of years. Like this is going to be very common in the classroom. In addition, 2 to 11% of children in the US are affected by oppositional defiant disorder. So again, that's between like 1 in 3 children per class of 30 that you get each year are going to be affected by oppositional defiant disorder. And similarly with the aggression, 44% of educators report seeing more violence by students now than they did in fall of 2019. So it's only getting worse. So what's behind the behavior? Part of my plan in effectively handling these chronic and severe misbehaviors is figuring out what's behind it. So it could be the inability to identify and regulate emotion. This is a common one we see in kids even that don't have chronic and severe misbehavior. And so we'll talk about ways to combat that later on. It could be the lack of social skills. It could be poor self-image. It could be a feeling of loss of control. The student feels that they're unheard or unseen. Could be that the student has experienced a lot of negative reinforcement cycles, whether that's from past classrooms and teachers, or a lot of times from their home life and their home experiences. Also, the presence of pretty traumatizing common life factors. And that all can affect their behavior. So again, with my strategy in intervening with these types of behaviors, I kind of see it in 2 different ways. First is recognizing their survival brain. So we're seeing students as fighting to survive rather than failing to thrive. So instead of seeing a student who's just causing trouble in the classroom, you're really looking at the why behind it. And when we help them feel safe, we can get to the root. And similarly, the Band-Aid fix. A Band-Aid fix is when you just slap a Band-Aid on something that, say the child is bleeding out and you slap a Band-Aid on it, the same thing can happen emotionally. So when we're not understanding the why or the what's behind the behavior, we're just slapping a Band-Aid fix on it and we're not actually finding solutions that are going to help us manage the behavior in the long run. So what to do? I kind of came up with 4 different steps on what I am going to probably choose to do in my own classroom. So the first is teach, model, and role playing. So we're spending time before the behavior happens. We're role playing social emotional skills. We're helping students deal with big emotions before problems arise. And part of that is giving praise often. So that could be classroom, having the school counselor come in and do a lesson for them. That could be, pulling them aside and um, and helping them talk through or walk through an emotion that you can see they're having before necessarily a problem arises. And also teaching and modeling it yourself. One thing I've seen my mentor teacher do recently is when she has a big emotion, she stops and kind of walks them through how she's handling it. When they see her handle it, then they know how to handle it better. Just like we would do for any other standard from the curriculum that we'd be teaching. So that's kind of what we are doing beforehand. Then number 2, break it down. When a problem does arise, we're helping the students break it down into bite-sized pieces. So we could use techniques such as restating, agreeing with the criticism, which would look like, yeah, I can see how that would make you feel, or yeah, I can see how this happened. Or also reflection sheets. Help the student think about the problem more deeply rather than just reacting to the problem. And then number 3, implement a strategy. And there's kind of 3 different strategies here that I want to talk about. The first is positive behavioral interventions and support. So this is kind of a 3-tiered implementation system. The bottom is going to be universal, where it's all students. It's typically school-wide. These include things like active supervision, positive reinforcement, community and service learning. Then for the yellow tier, these are going to be like at-risk students, so it's going to be more individualized to the classroom, maybe small group strategies. This is going to be what we're talking about. We're talking about teaching them social skills. We've increased the academic support. We have school-based adult mentors, whether that be the school counselor or an assistant principal or something like that. And then tier 3 is the red zone. That's targeted and intensive. And so this is going to be like parent training. You're going to bring the parents in and talk with them. You're going to make an individual behavior plan rather than just the behavior plan you have set for your classroom. And also this is to the point where they're talking about suspension and expulsion, and you're finding alternatives for that. Functional behavioral analysis I'll talk about in a second, but the other thing is self-management techniques. So this is helping students learn to regulate and manage their own behavior, whether that's like have a chart, record their own behavior. One thing that I really like that my mentor teacher talked about is, or implements in her classroom, is a clip up chart, or she uses magnets, but essentially everyone starts the day at 0. And when you answer a question, or you are like particularly proud of something you did, you worked extra hard on an assignment, you are in charge. She doesn't manage this. She puts the students in charge. She has them move their magnet up. And then at the end of the day, whatever slot you are on with your magnet, you did get a different reward. But students are managing and regulating their own behavior because she's not in charge of that. So over to functional behavioral analysis. This is a strategy that I think I will use often, and I've seen used often, not only at school, but also like in my own home life. I've got 2 siblings who both have ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder. And this strategy is so helpful, and it's one that I kind of have just ingrained into my head rather than having to write it down each time. So step 1, you're describing the inappropriate behavior. So in this analysis, you need to identify what it is. Then step 2, you're collecting information about the environmental events that occur before and after. So this could be like, well, the student had just come in from recess, or they were around this person, or like just log it. Then step 3, develop a hypothesis about the purpose of the behavior. Why, again, going back to that, why are they doing it? What's the cause behind behavior? Step 4, create a behavior intervention plan and test it out. Step 5, monitor that behavior intervention plan. And step 6, determine if it's effective. And if it's not effective, obviously redraw that and go back to step 3. An example that I've seen used in my own practicum classroom this semester is we had one student, I'll call him Liam for the sake of this example, but he was really struggling with name calling, and so that we described the inappropriate behavior, which was name calling, and specifically towards a few girls in our classroom with certain characteristics. We collected the information about the environmental events, so we stepped in and said, okay, well, we noticed that he's typically doing this. It's right after lunch recess. It's when he has hung out with one of the other boys in our class that also has a problem with this. And then we developed a hypothesis, which, okay, he is a very impressionable child. We think that he's doing this to try to fit in with this other boy, and to tease these girls because that's what he's seen the other boy do. So that was our hypothesis. We created a behavior intervention plan, which was pretty informal for this smaller behavior, but essentially we just would talk to him as we were coming in from that recess and station one of us next to him and make sure that the two boys were separated. And we thought that by doing this, it would help the behavior go down. So we did monitor the effect of that, and it actually did help a lot. We ended up moving them seats. We split them on other sides of the classroom. We didn't even have to tell them that any of this was done, but through this functional behavior analysis, we were able to figure that out. And so this is something that I plan on using in my class every single day, whether it's informal or formal, for more mild behavior challenges or more severe. And then step 4 would be to implement a consequence. So if none of that is working, here are 3 different things that I hope to implement in my own classroom. The first is a calm space. So this could look like a calm corner inside the classroom I've seen, with like different sensory items, coloring sheets, a chart where they can identify their own emotions and kind of talk about it. It could look like a green room. I saw this at my first practicum placement in the school. They could go to the green room with the counselor, where there was lots of opportunities for them to talk it out with her. And then that's where the principal could get involved if needed, if it was really severe, or a pause corner, which is essentially, I've seen in my second practicum, which is essentially the same thing as the green room, but there's one place in each corner of the school. So whether that's a calm space school-wide or a calm space in the classroom, but a place that a student can go when they feel completely out of control, to take a moment and calm down. You want to remove them from the stimuli and let them like have that think time. The second thing was a think sheet. They do this currently in my practicum placement, where a student has to take a second to think about why the situation happened, how they chose to handle it, and what they can do in the future to make a better choice. It has different prompts on there for them. This I've actually seen be super effective. I didn't know at first how effective it would be with severe misbehavior, but just in the last couple of days, I've seen it happen in my own practicum classroom, where we had a really massive issue with a couple boys, and they took time, they did their think sheets. They actually got sent to a different teacher on the team's classroom to get it done, so they weren't distracted by people that they know in our own classroom. So they were sent to another classroom. They took time, they did the think sheet, and they were able to come back and explain to me and my mentor teacher so much more behind the situation, and we were actually able to talk it out and come up with a plan on what they can do to make a better choice. And this is also going back to that self-management technique, when they can, a lot of times, especially with oppositional defiant disorder, when they can have a chance to think about it themselves instead of me telling them what was bad that they did and how they can make a better choice. It's placing the responsibility in their hand, and it's gonna hopefully eliminate some of that like hostile behavior towards authority figures. And the last thing is a behavior contract. So this is gonna be like tier 3 intervention. This is gonna be a 3-way contract between the parent, the student, and the teacher. whether answer questions like what behavior are they working on, what does it look like, how will we check in, and what is the consequence that could be positive or negative for this behavior. So, for example, for a misbehavior, what's the consequence going to look like? You come up with it together so that the parent and teacher and the student are all on the same page. Or if it's like they're working up towards being better in this area, then the consequence would be a positive reward. So those are just some different consequences that I hope to implement in my own classroom. And then I wanted to end with this quote from Elder Holland. He says, "Watch and listen for new ideas, things that may come to only you. And it may not have anything to do with what we're saying, but that's how the Spirit works. Be open to promptings about how you can teach, and remember, you can teach. You can do this." Um, and so I just want to close with that because I do feel like every classroom is different, and we could sit here and talk all day about all the different techniques and strategies. But ultimately, I hope that as I stay worthy to have a spirit, that I can figure out the exact best strategies and intervention plans that work for my students as I discover their whys and their causes behind their behavior. And although I can have different prevention and intervention techniques along the way, that just like Heavenly Father loves each of us individually, um, I can implement those individually for each student and work with them to figure out how to handle these chronic and severe misbehaviors the best way possible. And here are all those resources.